The price of loyalty. The morning sun painted Lagos's skyline in hues of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the marble floors of Obinna Ademola's office on the 40th floor of the Unity Towers. At 52, Obinna cut an impressive figure against the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tailored charcoal suit a testament to his success, but it was his eyes that truly captured his essence, kind, wise, and carrying a depth that spoke of both triumph and hardship. Below him, Lagos hustled and bustled, a symphony of honking horns and street vendors' calls rising up from the streets. But Obinna's thoughts were elsewhere, focused on the 3 photographs that sat on his mahogany desk. They showed younger versions of himself with 3 men, Chidi, Nnamdi, and Emeka. Each photo captured a moment of celebration, business launches, housewarmings, children's naming ceremonies. Each image told a story of friendship that had begun 25 years ago. A soft knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called out, turning to see his wife, Adana, entering with grace that hadn't diminished in their 28 years of marriage. At 48, she remained stunning, her beauty enhanced by an inner strength that had supported their relationship through countless challenges. "Lost in thought again, my love?" she asked, crossing the room to stand beside him. Obinna smiled, taking her hand. "Just remembering the old days. Do you recall when we first met Chidi?" Adana's expression softened. "How could I forget? He was selling newspapers outside that small restaurant in Surulere, desperate to pay his younger sister's school fees." The meeting room on the 38th floor buzzed with anticipation. Obinna sat at the head of the black marble conference table, watching as his 3 closest friends filed in. Each man's appearance told its own story of the prosperity they'd achieved, or rather, the prosperity Obinna had helped them achieve. Chidi Okonkwo entered first, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor. Once a newspaper vendor, he now owned the largest media distribution company in West Africa. Behind him came Nnamdi Ez, whom Obinna had found working as a security guard. Now he controlled a chain of luxury hotels. Last was Emeka Oluwaseun, who had risen from being a street food vendor to owning an international restaurant 25 years earlier. On a rain-soaked evening in Lagos, young Obinna had first encountered Chidi selling newspapers. The boy's determination caught his attention. While other vendors had sought shelter from the downpour, Chidi remained, protecting his papers with a torn plastic sheet. "Why don't you wait out the rain?" Obinna had asked, standing under his umbrella. Chidi's response was simple but powerful. "My sister's school fees are due tomorrow, sir. Every paper counts." That moment marked the beginning of a friendship that would span decades. Obinna not only bought all of Chidi's remaining papers but also paid for his sister's education. Over time, he helped Chidi build his first distribution company, starting with 2 delivery vans and growing into an empire. Similar stories marked the beginnings of his friendships with Nnamdi and Emeka. Each man had shown determination, grit, and potential that Obinna recognized and nurtured. Each success story had filled him with pride, watching them grow from struggling young men into successful businessmen. "My love," Adana said one evening as they sat in the garden, the scent of frangipani floating on the breeze, "sometimes I worry that your generosity blinds you to people's true nature." Obinna looked at his wife, admiring how the setting sun caught the silver strands in her dark hair. "You think I trust too easily? I think you see the best in people, and that's beautiful. But not everyone has your heart." She paused, sipping her tea. "I've noticed changes in them over the years. The way they look at you now, it's different." Adana had always been his compass, her intuition sharper than any business instinct. She'd grown up in a family that had lost everything to a trusted friend's betrayal, and that experience had given her a keen eye for human nature. The cracks in their friendships began to show during the annual charity gala Obinna hosted. While he had always insisted on donating 30% of the company's profits to education funds for underprivileged children, his 3 friends had started finding excuses to contribute less each year. "The market is tough," Nnamdi explained, adjusting his gold watch. "We need to think about sustainability." Emeka nodded in agreement. "Perhaps we should focus on our own families first." Chidi, who had once sold newspapers to support his sister's education, now argued against sponsoring more than 5 students per year. That evening, as Obinna walked through his garden with his driver, Muhammad, the older man offered an observation that would stick with him. "Sir," Muhammad said, his voice quiet but firm, "they have forgotten the taste of hunger." The idea came to Obinna during a trip to South Africa, where he had discovered vast gold deposits on land he'd quietly acquired years ago. The potential wealth was staggering, enough to transform not just families but entire communities. His first instinct had been to share the opportunity with his friends, but Adana's words echoed in his mind, "Test the metal before you forge the blade." That night, in their hotel room overlooking the Cape Town harbor, Obinna and Adana crafted their plan. It would require careful orchestration, convincing acting, and most importantly, patience. "We'll need to be thorough," Adana cautioned. "Men reveal their true nature slowly, like soup cooking in a pot." The downfall began subtly. First came rumors of a failed investment in the oil sector. Then, photographs of Obinna leaving meetings with bankruptcy lawyers were, accidentally, leaked to the press. His friends watched with varying degrees of concern as their mentor began to show signs of financial strain. The first test came when he approached Namdi about selling one of his prime properties in Victoria Island. "Of course, my brother," Namdi said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I will help you. After all you've done for me, it's the least I can do." The offer came in at 40% below market value. The morning Obinna moved out of his mansion became a spectacle in their exclusive neighborhood. He had deliberately chosen a Saturday, knowing his 3 friends would be at their homes to witness his departure. As movers loaded furniture into trucks, he noticed curtains twitching in the surrounding houses. Muhammad, who had insisted on helping despite it being his day off, watched with growing anger as expensive cars slowed down to observe the scene. In one of them sat a Mecca, phone held up discreetly to record the moment. "Sir," Muhammad whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "they are like vultures." Obinna placed a hand on his loyal driver's shoulder. "Sometimes, Muhammad, we must feed the vultures to catch them." That evening, in their new modest but comfortable home in a middle-class neighborhood of Lagos, Adana arranged their favorite family photos in the living room. Their children, away at universities abroad, had been briefed about the plan and sworn to secrecy. "Mama called," Adana said, carefully positioning a frame. "She's worried this deception might be too much strain on your heart." Obinna smiled, helping her straighten the picture. "Tell her not to worry." The strain of trusting blindly was far greater. It took less than a week for the first betrayal to surface. Chidi, who had built his media empire with Obinna's help, ran a front-page story in his newspaper, "Titan's Fall: The Collapse of the Ademola Empire." The article, while technically accurate about the visible signs of Obinna's supposed financial troubles, was peppered with anonymous sources hinting at mismanagement and possible fraud. Reading it over breakfast, Adana's hands shook with suppressed rage. "To think his sister still receives quarterly allowance from your scholarship foundation," she said. Obinna folded the paper carefully. "Let's not stop that. Her children shouldn't suffer for her brother's character." The rumor mill of Lagos high society churned with speculation. At exclusive clubs and private gatherings, theories about Obinna's downfall spread like wildfire. Namdi, once proud to be known as Obinna's protégé, now crafted a different narrative. "I tried to warn him about diversifying too quickly," he told anyone who would listen at the Lagos Business Club. "But you know how it is with these self-made men. Success makes them think they're invincible." The irony of Namdi's words, that he himself was one of Obinna's made men, seemed lost on him. The true weight of the deception fell heavily on Adana. As the wife of a supposedly fallen businessman, she endured countless slights and humiliations with grace. Former friends suddenly had excuses to cancel lunch dates. Charity boards she had served on for years began to suggest she take a break. But the final straw came when Emeka's wife, Chioma, visited one afternoon. Under the guise of concern, she delivered a carefully crafted insult. "Adana, dear, if you need help finding work, I'm sure our housekeeping staff could use an experienced manager." Adana's response was a masterclass in dignified restraint. Thank you, Chioma. But I already have a full-time job, standing by my husband. The next phase of their plan required the most delicate touch. Obinna began appearing at business functions looking increasingly haggard. Muhammad drove him to several high-profile hospitals, ensuring he was seen entering oncology departments. The news spread exactly as planned. Soon, their phones buzzed with messages from concerned friends, all checking if the rumors of Obinna's illness were true. None of the three former friends called directly. They sent brief text messages instead. Chidi, heard you're unwell. Praying for you. Nandi, let me know if you need anything. Brother. Emeka, God is in control. Each message was screenshot and saved in a folder Adana labeled simply, evidence. It was during this phase that Emeka made his gravest mistake. Taking advantage of Obinna's apparent vulnerability, he arranged to meet Adana privately, supposedly to offer support. They met at a quiet cafe in Victoria Island. My dear, he began, his voice dripping with false concern, I've known you and Obinna for so many years. It pains me to see you suffer like this. Adana sipped her water silently, recording every word on her phone in her handbag. Perhaps, he continued, leaning closer, this is God's way of showing you that you deserve better. A woman of your quality shouldn't have to struggle. My new villa in Banana Island has plenty of room. Adana's response was subtle but cutting. Interesting that you see God's hand in our troubles but not in the success Obinna helped you achieve. The meeting ended shortly after, with Emeka retreating in barely concealed frustration. That evening, as Adana played the recording for Obinna, they held each other in silence, mourning the death of what they had once thought was true friendship. The timing had to be perfect. Obinna and Adana spent weeks preparing for the revelation, ensuring every detail was in place. Their home office became a command center of sorts, with geological surveys, mining rights documentation, and satellite imagery carefully arranged. The bait must be irresistible, Adana said one evening as they finalized their plans. But not so grand as to raise suspicion. Obinna nodded, studying a geological report from South Africa. We'll present it as a desperate man's last hope, not a guaranteed fortune. Let their greed do the rest. Muhammad, who had become the trusted confidant, helped plant the initial rumor. At a local pepper soup joint frequented by drivers of the wealthy, he, accidentally, mentioned overhearing his boss discussing a mining opportunity. On a humid Wednesday evening, Obinna made 3 phone calls. To each friend, he spoke with carefully crafted vulnerability in his voice. To Chidi, brother, I know we haven't spoken much lately, but I've discovered something that could change everything. I need your media expertise. To Nandi, my friend, remember how you helped me with that property sale? I have another opportunity, but I need someone I can trust. To Emeka, I know things have been strange between us, but God works in mysterious ways. I've found something remarkable. Within hours, all 3 had agreed to meet at his modest home the following evening. As Obinna hung up the phone after the last call, Adana smiled knowingly. Did you hear how quickly they agreed? She asked. Yes, Obinna replied softly. The same speed at which they abandoned us. They arrived in their luxury cars, creating a stark contrast against Obinna's now humble neighborhood. Chidi in his Bentley, Nandi driving a latest model Range Rover, and Emeka in his Mercedes Maybach. Each man tried to appear casual, but their eagerness showed in their quick steps and nervous adjustments of their igbadas. Muhammad opened the door for each of them, noting how none acknowledged him despite years of acquaintance. He served them drinks, expensive whiskey Obinna had reserved for this occasion, and quietly positioned himself in the corner of the room, and silent observer to the unfolding drama. Obinna began his presentation humbly, thanking them for coming despite his recent difficulties. He spoke of his illness, his financial troubles, and then, with perfectly practiced hesitation, mentioned the gold mine. It was during my last trip to South Africa, he explained, projecting satellite images onto the wall. Before everything went wrong, I acquired some land there, thinking it might be good for agriculture. He paused, watching their faces. Each man leaned forward slightly, their expressions hungry for information. The geological surveys came back last week. He spread out professional-looking documents across the coffee table. The gold deposits are extensive. Conservative estimates suggest values exceeding several $1 billion. The room fell silent. Then Nnamdi, ever the quickest to act, spoke up. Brother, why are you telling us this? Surely you can use this to recover everything you've lost. Obinna's response was masterful. I lack the capital to develop it. The mining rights alone would cost millions. In my current situation, no bank will help me. But you, my trusted friends, if we pool our resources. For the next hour, Obinna watched as his former friends transformed into eager investors. They called their bankers, discussed liquidating assets, and began arguing about percentage shares. None questioned the authenticity of the documents or noticed that the land coordinates placed the supposed mine in a protected wildlife reserve. Then, just as they were reaching for their checkbooks, Obinna raised his hand. Before we proceed, he said quietly, I have something to show you. Adana entered the room with a laptop. On the screen was a video compilation, secret recordings of their betrayals, screenshots of their messages, newspaper clippings of their manipulated property purchases, and finally, Emeka's attempt to seduce Adana. The gold mine exists, Obinna said, his voice now firm and clear. But not in South Africa. It's in Ghana, and I own it outright. The papers you've been salivating over are carefully crafted fakes. The color drained from their faces as understanding dawned. My financial troubles, also fake. My illness, a test. You see, my friends, before I shared my real fortune with you, I needed to know if you deserved it. If you would stand by me the way I stood by you. The silence that followed Obinna's revelation was deafening. The expensive whiskey in their glasses remained untouched as each man processed the magnitude of their exposure. Mohammed stood vigilantly by the door, while Adana sat beside her husband, her presence a quiet statement of solidarity. Chidi was the first to break. The media mogul, usually composed and articulate, began to stammer. Obinna, my brother, you don't understand. His hands trembled as he reached for his glass. The newspaper articles, they were just business. You know how media works. We needed the headlines. Obinna raised his hand, silencing him. The headlines where you suggested I might be involved in fraud. The same headlines that caused the private school you own to reject my nephew's admission. That kind of business. Chidi slumped in his chair, the weight of his actions visible in his posture. Nnamdi took a different approach. The former security guard who had risen to own a hotel chain straightened his shoulders, attempting to maintain his dignity. This is outrageous, he declared, standing up. You deceived us, set us up. How dare you play such games? Adana's laugh cut through his bluster like a knife. Games, like the game you played when you bought my husband's property at 40% below market value. Or perhaps like the game you played when you told the Lagos Business Club that you were the real brain behind his success. She picked up a remote and played a recording of Nnamdi at the club, boasting about how he had always known Obinna's empire would fall. Nnamdi's face turned ashen as his own voice filled the room. But it was Emeka's reaction that proved the most dramatic. The restaurant magnate's face contorted with a mixture of rage and fear. You recorded everything, he whispered, his eyes fixed on Adana. Even our conversation at the cafe. Every word, Adana confirmed, her voice steel. Including your suggestion that my husband's illness was divine punishment, and your generous offer to console me in your Banana Island villa. Emeka lunged forward suddenly, his composure completely shattered. You can't show these recordings to anyone. Do you know what this would do to my reputation? My marriage? Mohammed stepped forward quickly, his presence a reminder that violence would not be tolerated. Obinna remained seated, watching his former friend unravel. Your reputation? Obinna's voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades of friendship betrayed. When you came to me 20 years ago, you were selling rice and stew by the roadside. I didn't just give you capital. I gave you my trust, my connections, my reputation. I introduced you to the investors who funded your first restaurant. I convinced the bank to give you your first major loan. And how do you repay this? By trying to seduce my wife when you thought I was dying. Each man's reaction revealed the true depth of their character flaws. Chidi began to weep openly, decades of carefully constructed media persona crumbling into raw shame. The man who had built an empire on information now faced the ultimate exposure of his own treachery. Namdi's arrogance finally cracked. He fell back into his chair, his attempts at righteous indignation replaced by the terrified realization that his own words and actions would destroy everything he had built. Emeka, perhaps the most transformed by wealth and the most corrupted by ambition, alternated between threats and pleas, revealing the desperation of a man who had lost all moral compass. "What do you want from us?" Chidi finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Obinna stood slowly, every inch the businessman they had once admired and now feared. I wanted friends who understood loyalty, who remembered their own struggles and stayed true to the values that brought us together. Instead, I got vultures waiting for me to die so they could pick my bones clean. "Here's what will happen now," Obinna continued, his voice steady. "Tomorrow, Chidi's newspapers will print a full retraction of every false story about my financial troubles. Namdi will publicly announce that he's returning all the properties he bought from me at full market value, with interest. And Emeka," he paused, looking at the man who had dared to approach his wife, "you will resign from the board of every company I helped you acquire shares in. And if we refuse?" Namdi asked, trying to salvage some control. Adana stepped forward, holding up a flash drive. "Then every recording, every document, every piece of evidence we have collected goes to the press. Not Chidi's newspapers, the international press. Let's see how your shareholders react to learning how you really conduct business." In the days following the confrontation, Lagos's business community witnessed a series of unprecedented events. Chidi's newspapers published retractions on their front pages, claiming editorial mistakes. Namdi's property company announced a series of strategic restructuring decisions, which included returning several prime properties to their rightful owner. Emeka quietly resigned from multiple board positions, citing personal reasons. But beyond these public actions, a deeper transformation was taking place in each man's life. 1 week after the revelation, Chidi sat alone in his media empire's headquarters, staring at a framed photograph from 20 years ago. It showed him and Obinna at the opening of his first newspaper office. In the image, both men beamed with genuine joy, their arms around each other's shoulders. His secretary entered with the latest circulation numbers. They had dropped significantly since the retractions began. As he studied the figures, Chidi realized that in betraying his friend, he had also betrayed his own principles as a journalist. He had turned the truth into a commodity, something to be traded for profit. That evening, he wrote a personal column titled, "The Price of Integrity," revealing his own moral failing without naming names. It would become his most widely read piece. Namdi's revelation came during a dinner with his teenage son, who had heard rumors at his private school about his father's business dealings. "Baba," the boy asked, "is it true what they're saying? That you took advantage of your friend when he was in trouble?" The question, innocent yet piercing, forced Namdi to confront the legacy he was leaving his children. Wealth without honor, success without integrity. What kind of example had he set? The next morning, he didn't just return Obinna's properties. He also established a foundation to help struggling security guards acquire education and business skills, remembering his own humble beginnings. For Emeka, redemption proved the hardest. His attempt to seduce Adana had revealed a darkness in his character that shocked even himself. His wife, upon learning of his actions, left him temporarily, taking their children to her family's home. In the quiet of his empty mansion, surrounded by the restaurants and hotels he'd built with Obinna's help, Emeka finally understood the poverty of his own soul. Success had not just changed him, it had corrupted him. Meanwhile, in Obinna and Adana's real home, not the modest house they had used for their ruse, but their actual residence, a different scene unfolded. Muhammad had been invited to dinner, not as a driver but as family. "Sir," Muhammad said during the meal, "when you first told me about your plan, I didn't understand why you would go to such lengths. Now I see. You weren't just testing him, you were trying to save them from themselves. Obinna nodded, reaching for his wife's hand. Wealth is like water, Muhammad. It can nourish, or it can drown. The true test of character is not how you handle poverty, but how you handle prosperity. In the months that followed, the story of Obinna's test became a whispered legend in Lagos business circles, though few knew the full truth. But the lessons resonated far beyond the immediate participants. Success often reveals character rather than builds it. True friendship isn't measured in shared prosperity but in sustained loyalty through adversity. Wealth without wisdom becomes a weapon that wounds its wielder first. The greatest poverty is the poverty of gratitude. In testing others, we sometimes save them from their worst selves.